Texas, 1875. The sun blazed mercilessly over Cottonwood Springs, a dusty frontier town where fortunes were made and broken on the backs of cattle drives and the steady flow of whiskey. Here, the only law that truly mattered was the one enforced by men with fast hands and cold eyes. It was no place for the faint of heart, and certainly no place for love. At least that's what Brody Walker had convinced himself. At 25, Brody had already earned a reputation as one of the finest cowboys in 3 counties. His skill with horses and cattle was matched only by his determination to remain untethered. The young rancher believed, with the certainty of the rising sun, that attachments were dangerous things in the unpredictable West. Every man he'd known who'd fallen for a woman had eventually grown soft, vulnerable, or dead. The frontier demanded vigilance and independence, 2 things a man couldn't maintain with a woman clouding his judgment. A man's only as good as his word and his horse out here, he often told the cowhands who worked his modest but growing spread just outside town. Everything else is just asking for trouble. Tall and broad-shouldered, Brody cut an impressive figure when he rode into Cottonwood Springs that fateful Saturday. His face, tanned by long days in the saddle but youthful beneath his wide-brimmed hat, showed only a day's worth of stubble. His blue eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing as he dismounted outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, tethered his chestnut gelding, and adjusted his gun belt, a habit born of necessity rather than show. What he wanted was simple. Expand his herd, grow his ranch, and someday become as respected as the cattle barons whose names were spoken with reverence throughout the territory. What he didn't know, couldn't have known, was that what he needed was waiting inside that saloon, about to be offered up as the punchline to a cruel joke. Amelia Thornton was precisely 18 years and 3 months old when her life became a commodity to be bartered away. With chestnut brown hair that fell in gentle waves past her shoulders and eyes the color of summer sage, she possessed a beauty that seemed out of place in the rough-hewn frontier. Her simple blue calico dress, mended in several places but clean and pressed, did little to hide her slender figure or the quiet dignity with which she held herself, even now. $5. Do I hear $5 for this fine mail-order bride? The auctioneer's voice boomed across the saloon, drawing howls of laughter from the assembled crowd. Gentlemen, she can cook, clean, and comes with her own trunk of belongings. A bargain at twice the price. Amelia stood on the small platform, her face burning with humiliation but her eyes dry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of her tears. Not these men who had intercepted the stagecoach bringing her to meet her intended, only to discover that the man who had sent for her had died 2 weeks prior. With no money to return east and no family to take her in, she had become an object of amusement, the mail-order bride with no groom. "I'll give you $2 and a bottle of whiskey," shouted one drunken miner to uproarious laughter. $3 and she can start tonight," called another. Amelia's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her chin raised. The frontier had taught her one bitter lesson already: survival required strength. The orphanage had prepared her for hardship, but nothing had prepared her for this particular brand of frontier cruelty. Brody pushed through the swinging doors of the Silver Dollar, removing his hat as he entered. The noise hit him first, then the stifling heat of too many bodies in the cramped space. It took him a moment to make sense of the scene. A young woman on display like cattle at auction, men calling out insulting bids, the gleeful cruelty on their faces. $4 from Hank, do I hear 5? The auctioneer, who Brody recognized as Jasper Mills, the livery stable owner, was playing to the crowd. "Come on, boys, look at her. Educated too, they say. Can read and write and everything." Something cold settled in Brody's stomach. He had seen many ugly things on the frontier, men killed over cards, others left to die in the unforgiving wilderness, but there was something about this spectacle that struck him as particularly vile. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity in the young woman's posture, or perhaps it was the fact that not one man in the room seemed inclined to put a stop to it. $20, Brody called out, his voice cutting through the raucous noise like a knife. The room fell instantly silent. Men turned to stare, some with mouths agape. "Well now," Jasper recovered quickly, grinning broadly, "looks like we've got ourselves a serious bidder." $20 from Brody Walker. Amelia's eyes found his across the room, wary, suspicious, but with the faintest glimmer of hope. It was that small light that propelled him forward, through the parting crowd. "This joke has gone on long enough," Brody said, reaching the platform. He pulled out the money and tossed it onto the small table. "Miss, gather your things if you please." "Now hold on," drawled a burly man with a week's growth of beard. I was about to bid 25. No, you weren't, Brody replied, his hand casually resting near his holstered Colt. And this isn't an auction anymore, it's over. Something in his tone, or perhaps the steady look in his eyes, convinced the other man to back down with a muttered curse. Brody turned his attention back to Amelia, who had not moved from her spot. Miss, your belongings. Why? She asked simply, her voice surprisingly steady. It was a fair question, and one to which Brody had no ready answer. Acting on impulse went against everything he believed about survival in the West. Because no one deserves this, he finally said, keeping his voice low, and I've got a ranch house that could use some looking after while I'm out with the herd, proper employment if you want it. If not, I'll see you safely to wherever you'd rather go. Suspicion warred with necessity in her expression, and what would this employment entail exactly, Mr. Walker? Smart, Brody thought. She was right to question the motives of any man in this situation. Cooking, cleaning, mending, your own room with a lock on the door, fair wages. He paused, then added firmly, nothing more. Around them, the men were losing interest as they realized the entertainment was over. Some drifted back to their card games, others to the bar. Jasper counted the money with a shrug. He'd gotten more than he expected for the joke. Amelia studied Brody's face for a long moment, weighing her limited options. Finally, she gave a small nod. My trunk is behind the bar, she said. I accept your offer of employment, Mr. Walker, though I should warn you that my cooking skills are somewhat limited. For the first time, Brody offered a slight smile. I've been eating my own cooking for 3 years, Miss Thornton. Limited would be an improvement. As they left the saloon, Amelia's small trunk loaded onto Brody's wagon and her seated primly beside him on the bench. Whispers and stares followed them. Brody knew what they were thinking, what most assumed, but he found he didn't much care. He had made his decision, impulsive though it was. They think you've bought yourself a wife, Amelia said quietly as they cleared the town limits, heading toward the open country beyond. Let them think what they want, Brody replied, keeping his eyes on the trail ahead. Out here, a person's worth isn't in what others think of them. What is it in, then? The question caught him off guard, and he considered it as the wagon rumbled over the rutted trail. I reckon it's in what they do. How they face whatever comes their way. He glanced at her profile, noting the stubborn set of her jaw. You've got grit, Miss Thornton, standing up there like that. The frontier respects grit, even if those fools back there don't. I'm not sure grit will be enough, she said softly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. It's a start, Brody replied, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Out here, sometimes a start is all you get. The Walker Ranch was modest compared to some in the territory, but it was well maintained, a testament to Brody's diligence. The main house was a sturdy 2-story structure of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. A barn, corral, and bunkhouse for the seasonal hands completed the central compound, with open grazing land stretching beyond. Amelia took it all in silently as Brody pulled the wagon to a stop. In the fading light, it looked both imposing and welcoming, a contradiction that seemed to mirror the man beside her. It's not much, he said, jumping down and coming around to help her, but it's mine. There was unmistakable pride in his voice, and Amelia found herself respecting it. Whatever else Brody Walker might be, he was clearly a man who valued what he had built with his own hands. It's very fine, she replied honestly, accepting his assistance down from the wagon. Her legs felt stiff after the long ride, and she stumbled slightly, her hand gripping his forearm for balance. For a brief moment, they stood closer than propriety allowed, her face upturned to his in the gathering darkness. Brody stepped back first, clearing his throat. I'll show you to your room, you must be tired. The inside of the house surprised her. It was clean and orderly if sparsely furnished. The main floor contained a kitchen with a large stone hearth, a dining area, and a sitting room with bookshelves that caught Amelia's attention immediately. You read? She asked, unable to hide her surprise. Brody looked almost embarrassed. When there's time, winter evenings mostly. My mother taught school back east before she married my father. It was the first personal information he had volunteered, and Amelia filed it away carefully. My mother was a seamstress, she offered in return. She taught me before she and my father died of fever when I was 11. Brody nodded, accepting this piece of her history without comment or pity, something Amelia found surprisingly comforting. He showed her to a small but clean bedroom on the second floor, as promised, with a sturdy door and a lock. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a chest of drawers comprised the furnishings. "The pump's out back for water," he explained, placing her trunk at the foot of the bed. "Outhouse is behind the kitchen garden. I've got 3 hands who stay in the bunkhouse, but they're respectful men. Still best to bolt your door at night. Thank you, Mr. Walker, for all of this." He shifted uncomfortably, as though unused to gratitude. "Get some rest, Miss Thornton. Morning comes early on a ranch." With that, he left her alone with her thoughts and the enormity of how her life had changed in a single day. Amelia sank onto the bed, finally allowing the tears she had held back for hours to fall silently. Not tears of despair exactly, but of relief mingled with uncertainty. She had escaped one fate only to face another unknown one. As she unpacked her meager belongings, Amelia made a silent vow: she would not be a burden here. Whatever this strange new arrangement was, she would prove her worth, to Brody Walker and to herself. The frontier might be harsh and unforgiving, but she was determined to find her place in it. Dawn arrived with a chorus of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. Amelia, who had slept fitfully in the unfamiliar bed, rose with the first light. She dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a simple brown cotton with white trim, and pulled her hair back with practiced efficiency. If she was to be a housekeeper, she would look the part. The kitchen was empty when she came downstairs, though the back door stood open, suggesting Brody was already outside. A cast-iron stove dominated one wall, and Amelia set about figuring out how to light it properly. By the time Brody returned, she had managed to get coffee brewing and was attempting to make sense of the provisions in the pantry. "You're up early," he observed, removing his hat as he entered. "I thought that was expected," she replied, suddenly uncertain. "Should I not have started breakfast?" "No, it's fine, just didn't expect." He trailed off, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Coffee smells good." Taking it as approval, Amelia relaxed slightly and returned to her task. She found bacon and eggs and set about preparing them, conscious of Brody watching her from where he'd seated himself at the table. "Your men, will they be eating here too?" she asked. "No, they take their meals in the bunkhouse. Pete's been cooking for them." He paused. "Pete's my foreman, been with me since I bought this place." Amelia nodded, setting plates on the table a few minutes later. The bacon was a bit too crisp and the eggs slightly runny, but it was edible. She waited anxiously as Brody took his first bite. "It's good," he said, and though she suspected it was more politeness than truth, she appreciated the effort. "About your duties." "I can learn to cook better," she interjected quickly, "and I'm a good seamstress. I can mend and make new things if needed. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Walker." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I don't doubt that, Miss Thornton. I was going to say that I'll be heading out with the hands later today to move some cattle to the north pasture. We'll be gone overnight, probably. You'll have the house to yourself." "I see." The prospect was both liberating and intimidating. "There's a shotgun in my room above the door. Do you know how to use one?" The question surprised her. "No, I don't." "I'll show you before I leave. Not that you'll need it, but out here, it's best to be prepared." The matter-of-fact way he said it made Amelia realize just how different this world was from the one she had left behind. In the East, in the orphanage, and then as a seamstress's assistant, she had never touched a weapon. Here, it was simply a fact of survival. "Thank you, I would appreciate that." They finished breakfast in companionable silence, and Amelia found herself studying Brody when he wasn't looking. There was a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with his obvious strength and self-sufficiency. It made her wonder what experiences had shaped him, what had led him to build this life alone in the vastness of the frontier. Later that morning, true to his word, Brody showed Amelia how to handle the shotgun, how to load it, aim, and fire if necessary. Her first practice shot went wide, but the second hit the wooden target he had set up, surprising them both. "Good," he said simply. "Remember, it's got a kick. Brace yourself better next time." Next time, the words implied a continuity she found oddly comforting. As Brody prepared to leave with his men, he gave her final instructions about the house, the livestock she would need to tend to, and when to expect their return. It was a lot of responsibility to entrust to someone he barely knew, and Amelia said as much. "Why do you trust me with all this?" she asked as he mounted his horse. "You don't know me." Brody considered her question, his expression thoughtful beneath the brim of his hat. I'm a fair judge of character, Miss Thornton, have to be out here. And I reckon a person who can stand tall while being auctioned off as a joke has a certain kind of honor. He adjusted his reins. Besides, there's not much worth stealing that you could carry off alone. The last was said with a hint of humor, and Amelia found herself smiling despite herself. I'll take good care of things, Mr. Walker. I know you will, he nodded to her and then to his men, and with that they rode out, leaving Amelia standing in the yard, watching until they disappeared over the distant ridge. Alone for the first time since her arrival, Amelia turned back to the house, her domain for the next day and night. Rather than feeling isolated, she felt a strange sense of possibility. This was her chance to prove herself, to establish her place in this new world. She spent the day cleaning thoroughly, taking inventory of supplies, and exploring every corner of the house. In Brody's study, she discovered more books than she had initially noticed, volumes of history, adventure tales, even poetry. It humanized him in a way that their brief interactions hadn't yet managed to do. By evening, she had completed more tasks than she had set for herself, including mending several shirts she found in need of repair. Sitting on the porch as the sun set, Amelia felt a contentment she hadn't expected. The vastness of the land around her, which had seemed intimidating at first, now felt like it held infinite possibilities. For the first time since learning of her intended groom's death, she allowed herself to think that perhaps, just perhaps, things might turn out all right. The next day passed in similar industry, and by the time Brody and his men returned in the late afternoon, Amelia had transformed the house in subtle but noticeable ways. Fresh curtains made from fabric she had found in a chest, a properly set table for dinner, and the aroma of a reasonably successful stew greeted Brody as he entered. He paused in the doorway, taking it all in with an unreadable expression. You've been busy. I hope you don't mind, Amelia said, suddenly uncertain. I found the fabric and thought. It looks good, he cut her off, his voice softer than she had heard it before. Real good, like a home should. The simple approval warmed her more than it should have, and Amelia busied herself with serving the meal to hide her pleasure. As they ate, Brody told her about the cattle drive, a small one by most standards, but important for rotating the grazing land. He spoke with obvious knowledge and passion about his ranch, and Amelia found herself drawn into his vision for its future. You really love this land, she observed during a pause in his explanation. Brody looked slightly embarrassed, as though caught showing too much of himself. It's all I have, he said finally. All I need. The words were spoken with conviction, but Amelia caught something else in his tone, perhaps a question he himself wasn't aware he was asking. But she didn't press, sensing that whatever trust was growing between them was still fragile. As the days turned into weeks, a routine developed. Amelia managed the household with increasing confidence, while Brody and his men tended to the ranch. Their interactions, initially formal and cautious, gradually relaxed into something more comfortable. Brody began to linger over breakfast, telling her about his plans for the day. Amelia found herself sharing stories from her childhood, carefully edited to focus on the happier moments, but it was the evenings that truly changed. What had begun as silent meals evolved into conversations that sometimes stretched late into the night. Seated in the parlor with a lamp burning low, they would discuss books they had both read, exchange views on everything from politics to the proper way to make biscuits, and occasionally simply enjoy the companionable silence. Neither of them acknowledged the shift, the invisible thread that seemed to be drawing them closer. Brody maintained his respectful distance, never crossing the line of propriety. Amelia kept to her role as housekeeper, though her feelings had begun to wander into dangerous territory. The turning point came nearly 6 weeks after Amelia's arrival, on a day that had dawned with ominous dark clouds gathering on the horizon. By mid-morning, the storm had broken with ferocious intensity, thunder cracking overhead, lightning splitting the sky, and rain coming down in sheets. Brody and his men had gone out at dawn, before the worst hit, to secure a section of fence that had been damaged. They should have been back hours ago, and Amelia found herself pacing by the window, peering anxiously into the curtain of rain. When she finally spotted riders approaching, her relief was short-lived. Even through the downpour, she could see that something was wrong. Brody was slumped in his saddle, supported by Pete on one side. Amelia ran out into the rain without a second thought, reaching them as they dismounted at the barn. Brody's face was ashen beneath his tan, and blood stained his shirt along his right side. What happened? She demanded, helping Pete support Brody's weight. Spooked horse kicked him into a fence post, Pete explained grimly. Post had a nail sticking out that caught him good. He's lost a fair amount of blood. Together, they managed to get Brody into the house and onto his bed. Pete helped remove Brody's boots and sodden shirt before tactfully withdrawing, leaving Amelia to tend to the wound. It was a nasty gash along his ribs, still seeping blood. Should have seen the other fella, Brody muttered, attempting humor despite his obvious pain. Be still, Amelia ordered, gathering clean cloths and hot water. The sight of his bare torso, tanned and muscled from years of physical labor, caused a flutter in her stomach that she firmly pushed aside. This was no time for such thoughts. She cleaned the wound carefully, apologizing when he winced. It needs stitching, she said, assessing the damage. I can do it. I've mended enough cloth to manage skin. Brody's eyes, clouded with pain but still alert, met hers. Do what you need to, he said simply, and the trust in those words nearly undid her. Steeling herself, Amelia prepared a needle and thread, then hesitated. You should drink some whiskey first, for the pain. He nodded toward the drawer in his bedside table. On there. She found the bottle and helped him take several long swallows before beginning her work. To his credit, Brody barely flinched as she stitched the wound closed, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Only the sheen of sweat on his forehead betrayed his suffering. When she had finished and bandaged the wound, Amelia helped him into a clean shirt, trying to ignore the intimacy of the moment. His skin was hot beneath her fingers, and she worried about fever setting in. You need to rest now, she said, pulling a chair close to the bed. I'll stay and watch over you. No need, Brody protested weakly. I'll be fine. I'm staying, she said firmly, and something in her tone must have convinced him not to argue. As the storm raged outside, Amelia kept vigil. She bathed his forehead when fever did indeed take hold, changed his bandages, and coaxed him to drink water and broth. Through the night, as his fever broke and then spiked again, he drifted between consciousness and delirium. In his fever dreams, he called for his mother, mumbled about cattle and water rights, and once, heart-stoppingly, whispered Amelia's name with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. She told herself it was merely the ramblings of a sick man, that it meant nothing, but deep down, she knew something had shifted between them. By morning, Brody's fever had broken for good, and he slept peacefully. Amelia, exhausted but relieved, allowed herself to doze in the chair beside him. She woke to find him watching her, his blue eyes clear and alert. You stayed, he said quietly. Of course I did. A silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Thank you, he finally said, his voice rough, not just for this, for everything these past weeks. Amelia felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. It's what I'm paid to do. No, Brody shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. It's more than that, you've made this place. He trailed off, searching for the right word. A home, Amelia suggested softly. His eyes softened. Yes. A home. The moment stretched between them, fragile and pregnant with possibility. But then Pete knocked at the door, breaking the spell, coming to check on his boss and report on the morning's work. Amelia slipped out, her heart hammering in her chest. Something fundamental had changed, though neither of them had said it aloud. The question was what would happen next. The answer came sooner than she expected. That evening, as she brought Brody his dinner on a tray, he was still confined to bed on her insistence. He caught her hand as she turned to leave. Amelia, he said, the first time he had used her given name. Sit with me a while. She settled into the chair beside his bed, suddenly shy under his intent gaze. I've been thinking, he began, setting aside his half-eaten meal, about what happens next. Amelia's heart skipped. Next. You've been here nearly 2 months now. Your position was never meant to be permanent, and I reckon you might be wanting to move on, maybe to a proper town where there'd be more opportunities for a young woman with your skills. It wasn't at all what she had expected him to say, and Amelia struggled to hide her disappointment. Are you asking me to leave, Mr. Walker? Brody, he corrected gently, and no, that's not what I'm asking, the opposite in fact. He took a deep breath as though steeling himself. I'm asking if you might consider staying. Not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. The words hung in the air between them. Amelia stared at him, certain she had misheard. Your wife, she repeated incredulously. Brody looked uncomfortable but pressed on. I know it's sudden, and I know we're still getting to know each other. But these weeks they've shown me that maybe I was wrong about what I needed in life. He met her eyes directly. I was so sure that being alone was safer, that attachments were dangerous out here. But when I was lying there with that fever, all I could think about was you, about how you've changed everything just by being here. Amelia's mind raced, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must hear it. Brody, You don't have to answer now, he said quickly. It's a big decision, and if it's not what you want, I understand. I'll help you get wherever you want to go. But I wanted you to know that you have a place here, a permanent one, if you want it. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Amelia felt tears threatening, not sad tears, but ones of overwhelmed emotion. From the moment she had stood on that auction block, her life had been a series of unexpected turns, but this was the most unexpected of all. I need time to think, she said honestly. Brody nodded, releasing her hand. Take all the time you need. That night, alone in her room, Amelia paced the floor, her mind in turmoil. Marriage to Brody Walker. It was both terrifying and exhilarating to consider. She had come to care for him deeply, there was no denying that. His quiet strength, his decency, the way he respected her thoughts and abilities, all had combined to create feelings she had never expected to have for the man who had essentially purchased her freedom. But was it love, and even if it was that enough to build a life upon, here in this harsh and beautiful land? Morning found her still uncertain, though leaning toward acceptance. She went about her duties as usual, avoiding being alone with Brody, who had insisted on getting up despite her protests that his wound needed more rest. The decision was unexpectedly forced by events beyond either of their control. Just before noon, a rider came galloping up to the house, a young boy from town, barely 13, his face flushed with exertion. Mr. Walker, he called, sliding from his horse. Mr. Walker, sir. Brody emerged from the barn, Amelia from the house, both converging on the agitated youngster. What is it, Tommy? Brody asked, recognizing the son of the general store owner. It's Jasper Mills, sir, and some others. They're coming for Miss Thornton. The boy gulped air, his message tumbling out. I heard them talking in the store. They're saying she wasn't really for sale, that it was just a joke, and that you stole her. They're coming to take her back to town, said something about a proper auction this time. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Brody had gone very still. How many? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. 5 or 6, I reckon. They were drinking already when I slipped out to warn you. The boy looked anxiously between them. Pa would have come himself, but he couldn't leave the store without raising suspicion. Brody nodded, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. You did right, Tommy. Thank your father for me. He glanced at the horizon, calculating. How far behind you are they? They were saddling up when I left, maybe 30 minutes, depending on how much more they drink before setting out. Right, Brody turned to Amelia, his expression grave. Go inside and pack your things, quickly. What, why? Amelia felt a flash of betrayal. Are you sending me away? No, Brody's voice softened. I'm taking you away. We need to leave before they get here. There's too many of them for me and the boys to handle safely, especially if they've been drinking. But where will we go? To Justice Harlow's place over in Cedar Creek. He's the circuit judge. We'll get married there today if you'll have me. That'll settle any question of your status once and for all. The proposal, so different from the careful one of the previous evening, took Amelia's breath away. Married today. Brody's expression was a mix of determination and vulnerability. I know it's not how either of us imagined it, but I care for you, Amelia, more than I thought possible. And I'll be damned if I let those men take you back to town for their amusement. The sincerity in his eyes made her decision suddenly clear. All her doubts seemed insignificant in the face of this moment of truth. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you today. Relief and something warmer flooded his face. Then we need to move fast. He turned to Tommy. Ride back a different way, boy. Don't let them see you. And thank you again. As Tommy galloped off, Brody called for Pete, quickly explaining the situation. Within 15 minutes they had a plan. Pete and the other hands would stay behind to protect the ranch, while Brody and Amelia would take the wagon across country to Cedar Creek, avoiding the main roads where Jasper and his men might intercept them. Amelia changed into her best dress, a dark green cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and hastily packed her trunk. By the time she came downstairs, Brody had the wagon ready, provisioned for the journey. It'll be rough going cross-country, he warned as he helped her up to the bench. but we should make it to Cedar Creek by nightfall if we push hard. As they pulled away from the ranch, Amelia cast a backward glance at the place that had become her home. Brody, noticing her look, reached over to cover her hand with his. "We'll be back," he promised. "This is still our home." Our home, the words sent a shiver of pleasure through her, despite the circumstances of their departure. For the first few hours they pushed hard, navigating the wagon across the uneven terrain. Brody kept glancing behind them, alert for any sign of pursuit. By mid-afternoon, they had covered significant ground, and he finally relaxed enough to slow their pace. "I think we're clear," he said, easing the horses to a more sustainable trot. "They'll have gone to the ranch first, and Pete will have sent them off on a false trail." "Your men are very loyal," Amelia observed. "They're good men. They know what those town fools are really after." He glanced at her. "Are you all right? This isn't exactly how I pictured proposing to you." Amelia smiled, finding unexpected peace in the midst of their flight. "Actually, I think it suits us. We didn't exactly meet in conventional circumstances, did we?" Brody's laugh was a rare and wonderful sound. "No, I suppose we didn't." As the afternoon wore on, they talked more openly than ever before. Freed from the constraints of employer and employee, they shared hopes and fears, dreams for the future, and the pieces of their pasts they had previously kept hidden. Brody spoke of his parents, both lost to a fever that had swept through their settlement when he was 17. How he had worked on other men's ranches for years, saving every penny until he could buy his own small spread. How he had expanded it year by year, driven by a determination to prove himself and a fear of depending on anyone else. "After my parents died, I decided that attachments were too risky," he admitted, "that the only safe way to live out here was to rely on myself alone." "What changed?" Amelia asked softly. He looked at her, his eyes clear and direct. "You did. Watching you face everything with such courage, seeing how you made my house into a home, it made me realize that maybe there are some risks worth taking." Amelia's throat tightened with emotion. She told him of her own losses, her parents, the years in the orphanage, her decision to become a mail-order bride out of desperation for a different life. "I was so afraid that day in the saloon," she confessed. "Not just of what might happen to me, but that I'd made a terrible mistake coming west at all." "And now?" She met his gaze steadily. "Now I think it was the best decision I ever made, though not for any reason I could have foreseen." The sun was low on the horizon when they crested a ridge and saw Cedar Creek spread out before them, a town slightly larger than Cottonwood Springs, with a proper church steeple visible among the buildings. "We made it," Brody said, relief evident in his voice. "Just in time for our wedding," Amelia replied, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation fluttering in her stomach. They found Justice Harlow at his home, a stately two-story house at the edge of town. The judge, a white-haired man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, listened to their story with growing indignation, selling a young woman as a joke. "Disgraceful," he muttered, "and now they think they can just take her back. Not in my jurisdiction, they can't." He agreed to marry them immediately, and to provide documentation that would make their union unassailably legal. His wife, a motherly woman named Martha, insisted on tidying Amelia up first, brushing the dust from her dress and arranging her hair with fresh flowers from her garden. "Every bride deserves to look her best," she said firmly. "Even in unusual circumstances." The ceremony itself was simple but dignified, performed in Judge Harlow's parlor with Martha and their grown daughter as witnesses. Brody, his hair still windblown from their journey but his expression solemn, promised to love and protect Amelia for all his days. Amelia, her heart full to bursting, pledged her love and fidelity with a steady voice. When Justice Harlow pronounced them husband and wife, Brody's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise of things to come. Amelia found herself trembling slightly, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in a single day. Martha insisted they stay for a celebratory dinner and spend the night in the town's small hotel. "It's not safe to travel after dark, and newlyweds deserve some privacy on their wedding night," she declared, with a knowing look that made Amelia blush. Later, in the simple but clean hotel room, Amelia's nervousness returned. This aspect of marriage was one she had barely allowed herself to consider in the rush of events. Brody, sensing her unease, approached her with careful tenderness. "We can wait if you're not ready," he offered. "Nothing needs to happen tonight that you don't want." His consideration only deepened her feelings for him. I want to be your wife in every way, she said softly. I'm just a little afraid. So am I, he admitted, surprising her. Not of this, but of how much I've come to need you. That's a first for me, Amelia. His vulnerability gave her courage. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble beneath her fingers. Then we'll learn together. Their first time as husband and wife was marked by tender discovery rather than practiced passion, awkward at moments, but ultimately sweet and affirming. Afterward, held safe in Brody's arms, Amelia marveled at the journey that had brought her to this place of belonging. What happens when we go back? She asked, her head resting on his chest. Brody's hand stroked her hair gently. We face whatever comes together. Judge Harlow's given us papers that prove our marriage is legal and binding. If Jasper or anyone else tries to cause trouble, they'll find themselves on the wrong side of the law. And the ranch. We'll build it together. Make it everything we've talked about. They returned to the Walker ranch the following day, approaching cautiously in case Jasper and his men were still around. But Pete met them at the boundary with good news. The troublemakers had been and gone, sent away with a clear message that any further harassment would be met with legal consequences. Told them you'd gone to get married proper, Pete said with a grin, and that Judge Harlow wouldn't take kindly to anyone interfering with a legal union. They didn't much like it, but they rode off eventually. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Amelia was no longer the housekeeper but the rancher's wife, a position she embraced with determination and joy. She learned to ride better, to help with the cattle when needed, to manage the accounts that Brody had previously neglected. Together they expanded the ranch, adding more grazing land and improving the house. Word of their unusual courtship spread, of course. Some in town still whispered behind their backs, but most came to accept and even admire the couple whose beginning had been so unconventional. 6 months after their hasty wedding, they held a proper celebration at the ranch, inviting neighbors and friends to share in their happiness. Even some of the men who had been at the saloon that fateful day came, sheepish but genuine in their congratulations. Jasper Mills was notably absent, having left the territory after his livery stable failed, due in no small part to the fact that many ranchers, including Brody's friends, had taken their business elsewhere after learning of his role in Amelia's humiliation. As the sun set on their celebration, casting golden light across the land they both loved, Brody pulled Amelia away from their guests for a moment of privacy on the porch. Happy? He asked, his arms around her waist. More than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. You know, I've been thinking, Brody said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. This place is getting bigger. Might be time to think about filling it with more than just the two of us. Amelia smiled, placing a hand on her stomach, where the secret she had been saving for this very moment was just beginning to show. I was hoping you might say that. Brody's eyes widened, then filled with a joy so pure it took her breath away. Really, when? Spring, she said, around the time the new calves come. He lifted her gently, spinning her in a circle of exultation, before setting her carefully back on her feet. I love you, Amelia Walker, more than this land, more than my own life. And I love you, she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as their guests began to notice their absence. My cowboy who saw more in me than a joke. They returned to their celebration hand in hand, facing their future together, a future built on respect and love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. The frontier that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving had become the setting for a love story neither of them could have imagined, but which both now knew was strong enough to withstand whatever challenges might come their way. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and their ranch prospered, Amelia and Brody Walker became living proof that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings can arise from the cruelest of jokes, when someone has the courage to see the true worth hidden beneath.